Andrei Biket of Euronews. Secretary General, what's your assessment of the latest cyber attack, including on some member states, and is NATO doing anything additional to protect the members?
The cyber attacks we saw in May, but also we have seen this week, just underlines the importance of strengthening our cyber defenses, and that's exactly what NATO is doing. We are implementing our cyber defense pledge, which is ensuring that we are strengthening the cyber defenses of both NATO networks, but also helping NATO allies to strengthen their cyber defenses. We exercise more, we share best practices and technology, and we also work more and more closely with all allies, looking into how we can integrate their capabilities, strengthening NATO's capability to defend our networks. We have also decided that a cyber attack can trigger Article 5, and we have also decided, and we are in the process of establishing cyber as a military domain, meaning that we will have land, air, sea, and cyber as military domains. All of this highlights the advantage of being an alliance of 29 allies, because we can work together, strengthen each other, and learn from each other.
Yes, please, here in the front row.
Mr. Secretary General, you are quite aware of the ongoing insecurity in Afghanistan, and the Taliban and the ISIS, they are actually gaining grounds on a daily basis. We know that you are discussing the defense expenditures here in this meeting. What does it really mean for Afghanistan?
So increased defense spending also helps to fund NATO's activities in Afghanistan. And we have decided to continue our presence, to maintain our military operations there. As you know, it's not a combat operation anymore, but what NATO does in Afghanistan is to train, assist, and advise the Afghan forces, enabling them to take over and to be responsible for security in their own country. And the situation in Afghanistan is difficult. We have seen Taliban and terrorist groups killing hundreds of civilians just the last weeks. But for me, this just underscores the importance of NATO continuing to help the Afghans, because the Afghan security forces have also proven capable, professional, and able to cope with Taliban and different terrorist groups, and responding to the many different attacks. But defense spending, increased NATO defense spending, enables also to fund our presence in Afghanistan, and it also enables us to continue to provide funding for the Afghan forces, because NATO allies spend money for their own forces in Afghanistan, but they also provide significant financial support for the Afghan forces, and we will continue to do so. We have decided to continue our funding of the Afghan forces at least until 2020.
Yes, please, Michael.
Michael Birnbaum from the Washington Post. How much of this year's defense spending increase would you attribute to the push from the Trump administration? Obviously, these numbers are approved long in advance, so I'm curious how this year's political push has affected this year's spending, if it has at all.
What we see is that since we made the pledge to start to increase defense spending, NATO allies have really started to deliver. The first year after we made the pledge, 2015, was the first year after many years of decline that we saw an increase in defense spending across Canada and Europe. Then that continued in 2016, and in 2017 we expect an even greater increase. So this is an implementation. What we see now is the implementation of the Defense Investment Pledge, and it is a significant increase we have seen over several years, and in total $46 billion more for defense across Europe and Canada. I welcome the strong focus of President Trump on defense spending and burden sharing, because it is important that we deliver, that we implement what we have agreed. At the same time, I have strongly stressed and underlined that European allies should invest more in defense, not only to please the United States, but they should invest more in defense because it is in their own interests and because they have participated in decisions and committed to increase defense spending. So I welcome the focus of the President on increased defense spending. At the same time, it's important to understand that this is implementation of a decision we all made together, and I welcome also the fact that we are now implementing and delivering on that pledge.
Yes, please, Robin, second row. No, second row here, this side. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin at Reuters. Do you know at this stage what the 2017 money will be spent on? Do you know if this money is going towards soldiers' pensions or it's actually going on hardware? And a second question related, I mean, if the money that you've now cumulatively gained is 46 billion, do you have any sense of the amount of time lost in the catch-up necessary? I mean, where the capability gaps still remain? Thank you.
The money, the 46 billion US dollars, will be spent on many different things. It will be spent on new investments. More and more allies are investing more in new equipment. And it will also be, of course, be spent on more exercises. And it will be spent on salaries and pensions. That's part of funding capable military forces, is that you have to pay the salaries, you have to pay the pensions, but you have also to invest in capabilities, equipment, and exercises, and missions and operations, like, for instance, in Afghanistan or in Kosovo or fighting ISIS. So the 46 billion and the total defense spending in the alliance will, of course, be allocated to many different purposes. But I think it's extremely important to understand the link between increased defense spending and the capabilities targets we are going to decide tomorrow. Because an important part of NATO is to coordinate the efforts of all the 29 allies, so we complement and strengthen each other. And that's the reason why we have this NATO defense planning process, where we identify gaps, where we identified where we need specific more equipment and capabilities, and then we invest in them in a coordinated way. And the capability targets will then identify the gaps where we need to invest more, and the funding will then provide the money to pay for investments in those capabilities.
Yes, please, gentlemen in the third row.
Mr. Secretary General, back to cybersecurity issues. Which practical steps can NATO take on Ukraine due to latest cyber attacks? Thanks.
NATO helps Ukraine with improving its cyber defenses. NATO has established a trust fund for cyber defense, where we finance the programs, the activities we do. So NATO experts, NATO provides help to Ukraine to improve its cyber defenses. And I think that the cyber attacks we have seen this week very much highlights the importance of the support, the help NATO provides to Ukraine to strengthen its cyber defenses, technical and other kinds of support. We will continue to do that, and it's an important part of our cooperation with Ukraine. Let me just move back to the previous question on defense spending. We will be able to share more detailed figures and numbers with you on specific allies, in individual allies tomorrow. Now we're able to publish the aggregated figures. When we have presented the disaggregated figures tomorrow to the 29 ministers, then we will also share that with you.
Yes, please, here in the middle in the third row.
Łukasz Rosiński from Polish Press Agency. Mr. Secretary General, you mentioned the battle groups on the eastern flank, and in the first day of July, President Trump will visit Poland. Do you expect any new decisions, commitments regarding the U.S. military presence in Poland on the eastern flank? Thank you.
I think the U.S. should comment on what the president will announce and say and do in Poland. But what I can say is that I welcome very much that President Trump is going to Poland. He will meet with Polish leaders, but also with leaders from many other NATO allies in the central and eastern part of our alliance. I welcome also that. The important thing is that NATO is increasing its presence in the eastern part of the alliance in a proportionate, defensive, measured way. At the same time, the US is partly part of the NATO or the increased NATO presence, but on top of the increased NATO presence, the US is also increasing its bilateral presence in Poland and other countries in Europe. Of course, that's part of the total NATO response. And in the budget proposal, which the President has put forward for the Congress, he proposes a 40% increase for U.S. troops or for U.S. military presence in Europe, which provides more money for troops, for equipment, for pre-positioned supplies, ammunitions, and also for more exercises. And I visited Lithuania and Latvia last week, and I saw how US troops now are exercising together with other NATO troops in that part of Europe. Let me also add that part of the increased US presence is that the US will now have a new armored brigade in Europe, in addition to the 2 brigades that are already here. So this is a significant increase of US presence, and I think that's the strongest sign of NATO solidarity, of US commitment to Article 5, the fact that the US is increasing its military presence in Europe. Actions speak louder than words, and it's good to see that than words, and it's good to see that the US is now increasing its presence in Europe.
Yes, gentleman in, yes.
Philippe Renier, newspaper Le Soir. Secretary General, back to Afghanistan. Do you expect tomorrow a decision regarding the next level of troops in Afghanistan? And secondly, as NATO is now fully integrated in the decision-making in the coalition against ISIL, are you worried about the recent reports, days after days, about civilian casualties in this fight? Thank you.
First, in Afghanistan, we will discuss the future of our mission in Afghanistan. We have already agreed that we will maintain our presence. We will now look into the exact force levels, and our military commanders have asked for a few thousand more troops. We will look into that request, and there is an ongoing force generation process in NATO where different allies are also announcing how many troops they are able to provide. Hopefully I can tell you more about specific troop numbers tomorrow. I don't think I will have the final number, but I guess I will be able to tell you a bit more about announcements from different countries. So I will be able to say some more about at least some numbers related to NATO presence in Afghanistan. Then, of course, we are always concerned about civilian casualties, and I know that all NATO troops and all NATO allies are always very focused on how can they avoid civilian casualties in Afghanistan, but also, of course, in Iraq, but as you know, and Syria. But as you know, the research support mission in Afghanistan is a NATO mission. But in Syria and Iraq, NATO is not participating in combat operations. We train Iraqi officers and we provide support to the to the air operations by the coalition over Syria and Iraq, but NATO as such is not part of the military operations in Syria. But I am absolutely certain that all NATO allies are extremely focused on how can they minimize civilian casualties.
And the gentleman just behind.
Lorne Cook from the Associated Press. If I can follow on the Afghan question. NATO took over ISAF in 2003, wound ISAF down, went to resolute support, train, advise, assist. Now we seem to be ramping back up again. We're also talking about accompanying troops as well. It's very hard from the outside not to draw the conclusion that things are ramping up again. I mean, is there mission creep? Can you assure us that we're not heading back toward combat?
Yes, there is no request, no plans to go back to combat operations. As you said, for many years, NATO conducted big combat operations in Afghanistan. It was our biggest combat operation. And then in 2015, we were able to hand over responsibility for the security in Afghanistan to the Afghans themselves. And I think that there are many problems and many challenges and many difficulties and still uncertainty and violence in Afghanistan. But at least one important achievement is that NATO has been able to train, to build Afghan army and security forces, which are now capable of taking over responsibility for the security in their own country. That at least is a very important step forward. We are not planning to go back to combat operations, but we are looking into the exact troop levels in our train, assist and advise mission. So this is more about adjusting, making sure that we have the right troops and the right troop levels or numbers to be able to fulfill the mission to train, assist and advise. And we are particularly looking into how we can train more special operation forces in Afghanistan. We know they have been key in countering the Taliban attacks and terrorist attacks in Afghanistan. They have proven extremely professional and they have shown bravery, but we need to strengthen and to increase the special operation capacity of the Afghan forces. We are helping them with building air forces, we're training pilots so they can have their own air force. That's also key to be able to fight Taliban and terrorist organizations, and how to improve leadership. So we will also train more and educate more Afghan officers.
Okay, yes, Anna in the fourth row.
Thank you, Ana Pisonero from the Spanish news agency Europa Press. You've mentioned the 46 billion figure, but could you tell us what the 4.3 amounts to for the increase of 2017? And I'm not too clear on what we have to expect. I think it's 12 billion, but I don't know if you can confirm it. And I don't know what we can expect exactly in terms of concrete decisions on the capabilities front. I mean, is it just the normal, regular defense NATO planning where NATO tells each of the member states where they have to step up in which capabilities or what they have to do, whether it's force protection or others? Is this what we're expecting for tomorrow? Because normally that's those kind of decisions are not really public. So it's just to understand what we'll get tomorrow. Thank you.
Tomorrow we will publish specific figures on all the individual allies. Which shows how we reached 4.3%, because that's of course is when we add the different allies, we reach 4.3% real increase from 2016 to 2017. And you're right, that's about $12 billion US. And again, you will have more details tomorrow because we want to share these figures with the ministers first, and then we will publish the figures. That's about defense spending. You will have, in nominal terms, in real terms, as percentage of GDP, real increase, and the nominal increase. You have a lot of figures you can look into tomorrow. But when it comes to the capability targets, that's not for. We don't publish that report, because that's of course about all the specific capabilities we are developing in NATO and which are assigned to different NATO allies. But we can tomorrow also share with you some aggregated figures illustrating what kind of capabilities we are looking into. In general, which we are going to invest in. In general, I think it's right to say that what we will do is to invest more in more heavier forces, more armor, more enablers, like for instance air-to-air refueling, air defenses, and also increase the readiness and the preparedness of our forces so they can move more quickly, and also to increase the number of forces and troops. So all of this is again linked to the Defence Investment Pledge, which will provide more funding, which then can be used to invest in high-end and heavier capabilities.
The gentleman just behind.
Vladimir Vashenko, Russian independent newspaper, Gazeta.ru. Mr. Stoltenberg, you have told about Lithuania and Latvia. So could you please tell us how many NATO troops right now standing in all three Baltic states? I mean Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. Thank you.
It is around 1,000 troops in each of the battle groups. So before somewhere between above 4,000 troops in total. Then of course you have national home defense forces in addition, and there's also some US bilateral presence in Poland and some other countries. What NATO does is defensive, it is proportionate, and compared to the tens of thousands of Russian troops we see on the other side of the border, I think it's obvious that what we do in the Baltic countries and Poland is a defensive and proportionate response.
We have time for two more questions. So, gentleman at the back.
Hi, Miloš Udović from Montenegro in Daily Vijesti. Montenegro became a member just a few weeks ago, and this is our first ministerial. What do you expect from Montenegro on this ministerial?
First of all, I look forward to welcoming Montenegro and to have Montenegro around the table. Montenegro have an equal say, equal seat, equal place in the alliance, together with all other allies. Montenegro will contribute to the alliance in many different ways. The fact that Montenegro has joined the alliance contributes to stability in the Western Balkans. That is important for Montenegro, but it's also important for the whole of Europe and the whole of NATO. And I also welcome the fact that Montenegro has increased defense spending. So they're also helping to deliver on the Defence Investment Pledge we made before Montenegro joined. But I welcome the fact that Montenegro is increasing defense spending.
One more question over in the corner here, in the first row.
I'm Abdul Khalid from Hama Press. My colleagues is translate to you. I have a question.
Okay, the question is that as Afghanistan and its international allies have been eyeing for peace for years now, we wonder if NATO and the Russian government, considering Russia's recent approach to the Taliban, are on the same page.
For us, the important thing is that we support the Afghan unity government, that we support and help the Afghan forces to develop and to strengthen their capabilities and capacities. I have seen the reports about more contacts between Russia and Taliban, but I'm not able to confirm anything about what kind of contacts that has been. But I can just underline the importance of full support to an Afghan-led peace process. We support efforts to find a peaceful, negotiated solution also to the conflict in Afghanistan. I welcome the fact that President Ghani has launched a new process for reconciliation. It was a meeting there earlier this month. And also the fact that President Ghani were able to convene the meeting and to take this initiative for a peaceful solution to the conflict, to the crisis or conflict in Afghanistan, despite of the attacks and the violence we have seen in Afghanistan recently. But this should be an Afghan-owned and Afghan-led process. So as long as Russia is willing to contribute and help to an Afghan-led process, I welcome it. I think the key is to make sure that the Afghans are able to solve their own problems, and we should help them with doing that.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.